Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome to the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Good to be back for another year.
Andrew. Happy New Year, mate. Good to be back.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Bills. It's good to be back on another podcast. Forgotten how to do this, so apologies in advance for this one. But yeah, been a little while since we've done some podcasting, so I might take some time to, bring it back up to speed.
Get the feet under the desk again and figure out how we do this. So hopefully it's not doesn't come across too rusty. But I reckon if I need to put money on it and I'm a betting man, I reckon we'll be straight back into it and providing our listeners with a whole heap of value and some things to think about, which is pretty timely considering start of the year and what we're talking about to our listeners. So Andrew, you want to run us through what today's episode's all about?
Yeah, today we're talking about all the things that you should be thinking about and all the things that you should be doing, at least financially, approaching a new year. So new year and new financial plan, Billy.
New year, new you, as I like to say, right? So one of the things that I've always found at this time of year, and I don't necessarily think it's just financial planning related. I mean, I tend to go through this naturally, and I think a lot of people tend to do it, but the New Year's resolution kind of mindset where you flip over the calendar and all of a sudden you're in a new year. So you start thinking about, I guess, all of those things. What do you want to achieve in the future? Look back at the year that was. And that tends to extend across a whole range of areas for me personally. Obviously, fitness is always one. Diet's always another. Finances are always another, which is what we're going to hit. But I don't know, Andrew, is that the same for you as well too?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's always a time for not only planning for the new year, but also reflection on, the last 12 months and what's happened. And hopefully you're looking back on it with a positive light.
Fingers crossed until you get the credit card statement in January. We'll talk about that in a sec because the Christmas hangover always rears its ugly head at some stage in January, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But
credit card? What's that, Billy? You shouldn't. Who's got a credit card?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Don't have credit cards.
Absolutely
that
right.
Exist.
Yeah, nobody does. Nobody does. It's just that we seem to talk about it for no reason, right? So, yeah, I guess at this time of year, reflecting back is always a good thing. What happened over the last 12 months from a financial perspective? Did you meet your goals? Why not? What's some of the things that you're coming across in conversations with clients around that?
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of the times you're having conversations around not only, did we meet our goals, but were our goals that we set out last year, are they still relevant? We planned to purchase an investment property last year. Was that what happened? Did we set that at the start of the year and we decided to change course halfway through? So, reflecting back on the last 12 months. And I mean, a portion of it is having to look back and making sure that, hey, if there's anything that we haven't met that's still relevant, all right, how do we work towards achieving it in the next 12 months? But also, I think it's important as well to look back on what you've set and give yourself a pat on the back. You've achieved your financial goals, you've achieved your savings goals, you've purchased the property, whatever that plan was for the last 12 months, make sure that you recognize and reward yourself and pat yourself on the back for achieving what you set out to achieve as well.
I think you're right, Andrew. There's a fair bit of gold in that because it's like those New Year's resolutions. I keep going back to that because that's kind of how I frame it in my mind. But even if you set yourself a goal, you're reflecting back on it, whatever it may be. In this instance, you spoke about purchasing an investment property, but it could be get your spending under control or something is on the smaller scale. But even if you didn't hit that, even if you work towards it and you got 80% of the way there, I mean, I think there's still some gold in that it's just, you're not
80% better than what you were last year.
Exactly right. And that was my point. You took the words right out of my mouth. But that's, reflect back. And if you've done some positive stuff towards building your financial future and working towards financial freedom, you've got to commend yourself. Even if you missed your target, it should make that easier because you can then carry that forward into the new year and think about, why didn't it work or why did I miss what I had set? And that hopefully should make the planning for the year ahead a little bit easier in that regard as well.
Yeah. And look, some things are going to be out of your control. We've all seen with COVID and lockdowns and all of that stuff. And if you've had a drop in income over the last 12 months or, you've been stood down or lost a job or anything like that. There are going to be things that you set out to achieve over 12 months. And if you don't quite get there because, either things that are in your control or even things that are out of your control, it is what it is. And you just need to plan for the next 12 months.
Yeah, 100%. And it's been challenging as well too, because we're starting to see some increases in cost of living and everyday goods as well. So that tends to throw a little bit of a spanner in the work as well too. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. One of the things that I alluded to before was the Christmas hangover. Samantha,
it's not the one that you've been drinking too much for. It's the financial hangover.
Well, it's probably a symptom of that and spending the money. But so Sam, I hope you're listening to this, honey. But you do your Christmas or festive holiday period. You let your hair down, enjoy time, festive period, time with friends and family. That's great. You're back to work like we are. You get your feet back into the swing of things or under the desk, so to speak. And all of a sudden your credit card statement arrives for that period. You open it up and you go, oh, geez, I've spent more than what I had projected. Hence the Christmas hangover analogy, right? Andrew, what do we do other than freak out for a little bit?
Yeah, look, you got to freak out a little bit because something's going to push you into action. Look, every situation is different. So, you can't say that everyone should be doing the exact same thing. But I can tell you that 99.9% of the time, it's get rid of that credit card, whatever the debt is, whether it's a credit card, whether it's a personal loan, whether it's Afterpay, whether it's, we've done a few podcasts in the past about, getting rid of it, but getting a plan of attack to get out of that hole as soon as possible. Because, yeah, it's great to, talk about all the great things that you want to achieve over the next 12 months, but that's going to be one massive thing that will ultimately be holding you back from, achieving what you want to achieve. There's very few, you can park your money in some really great places, but if your credit card interest is 25%, there's very few places where you can invest and earn a rate of return of above 25%. So your best point of call is work out an action plan. If you've got a credit card debt, how long is it going to take to pay it off? At what point am I going to be debt free? And work on getting that paid off as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think I picked up two things in that. So the first thing is, obviously you've got a debt that you've had from Christmas and the activity that you did there. So firstly, it's addressing that, needing to meet minimum repayments, making sure that you're meeting your obligations and your commitment to that. Then if you can pay it off in full, fantastic, that's great, away you go. But what you're alluding to, I guess, with your comments is getting to and reflecting back on some of our previous podcasts about what do you do from a longer term or a medium term perspective in terms of actually not getting yourself into that position again by getting rid of the credit card.
Exactly right.
Yep.
Exactly right. And
so prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But look, you got to get it to a 0 point before you can start the preventative medication, so to speak. Like, if there's still a credit card looming over your head, you just need to drive absolutely everything towards getting to a 0 point.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I know that we talk about the Christmas hangover and what do you do about it? Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. In all of my experience, once you've incurred it, it's too late anyway.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of creating the system moving forward to make sure that you don't get into that position. I know that, some of our clients in particular, so they don't run into this position, they put some money aside periodically each week or each pay cycle. You put away $50 a week, and that's by the end of the year, that's $2,500 roughly that people have got saved up to prevent either this from happening or those bigger expenses, going on holidays, buying Christmas presents. The money is already there, so you don't have to, they rack up that debt on a credit card and then have to worry about how you're paying that back. So yeah, definitely prevention is better than cure. And if you can plan for it, the better off you are. But I don't know any silver bullet or any other strategy other than you just need to meet your commitment and your repayments and get rid of that debt and pay it down as quickly as you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which brings us sort of to the next point, Bills, when you're talking about prevention as opposed to the cure, reviewing your budget and your cash flow position. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I shouldn't say it's simple. Mathematically, it's a fairly simple thing to do. In practicality, it's difficult because there's so many ways that not necessarily money comes into our bank account, but the way that it goes out. There's direct debits, there's point of sale spending, there's credit cards, there's subscriptions. I just signed up to Paramount Plus last night, 7 days free, another $9 a month. There you go. Add that to it and you don't even forget about it. But there's an extra $108 a year that I'm spending on services with entertainment. So it's a matter of getting an understanding of, I think, first and foremost, your income, which is pretty straightforward unless, you're in an industry or in a job where it does fluctuate. But for most people, I'd say it's consistent each cycle. So getting an understanding of what that looks like, then running your eyes. And once again, we've spoken about this in previous podcasts, but talking about your expenses, what's actually happening in reality and what you want to see happen are two different things. So when you're doing your cash flow position and going back to your expenses, you need to actually be realistic and look at what you've spent. And you can go back for whatever period of time. The longer you go back, the more accurate it's going to be. But being really realistic about it, as opposed to saying, I think I spend $250 a week at the grocery store, but when you actually look at it in reality, it's $300 or $350. That'll make a massive difference to this exercise. But like anything, knowing where you're at and assessing that position first and foremost is the most important thing, at least initially, because you can't improve something unless you can measure it. So that's definitely the starting point to figure out where you're at. And then once you've got that in mind or that position clear, you can then determine which way you need to go and what you need to do.
Yeah, exactly. So if you don't have a budget, that should really be the first point in call. Create a budget, get an understanding of where you're spending your money, get an understanding of how much is coming in, but more importantly, how much is going out and where it's going to. If you've already done the right steps, which I hope that all of our listeners already have, and you've already got a budget, now's the time to review it. Start of the year is usually something or a time where people are talking about financial New Year's resolutions is one of the things that goes around. It's a time for reflection. It's a time that, for most people work, you're not in the day-to-day grind of it and things are just starting to ramp up. And so reviewing your budget and making sure that, hey, just because I set a budget 12 months ago and that's true and accurate, is that still true and accurate today? Do I need to relook at this? And while you're also doing that, hopefully if you've, listened to our podcast in the past and listened to how we recommend structuring our budgets, you've also got some direct debit expenses. You've got some things like, as Billy said, your subscription services for entertainment, your home and contents insurance policies, your car insurance policies, all of that stuff. This is also a good time to review those direct debit expenses. Am I still getting the best deal? Can I go elsewhere and get a better deal? Can I do anything to drive that surplus income? And we're talking about really the 1%ers here, getting an extra, little hit on little reduction on your expenses, which once you tally it all up and once you get to the end of it, a lot of the times it's pretty surprising how much of an impact it can have at the end of the day.
That's a really timely one. I just recently received my renewal notice in the mail from my insurer for our house and contents. And I won't talk numbers, I'll talk percentages, but the increase year on year, and they put this on the renewal notice as well too, was 25%. And it's a house and contents premium, so it's not like you're talking a small amount of money. Relatively speaking, 25% is quite significant. So I don't know if it falls in that 1% category, but that's one of the things that you're alluding to. You just need to be on top of this stuff all of the time because it does definitely add up. And if you're not careful and you don't pay attention to it, it seems like these increases are just automatic and tend to happen. And especially with big things like your house and contents insurance, your health insurance is another big one as well too, where when they increase, which is every year on the anniversary date, they tend to increase
pretty hard,
fairly aggressively. And in my mind, it's never really justified, if I'm completely honest. I'm spending more time at home because of COVID and working from home and all the fun stuff. Don't ask me how that increases at 25%. I've got no idea.
Yeah. And look, do whatever's right for you. I mean, for some people, it's you review it at the policy anniversary. Me personally, I'd rather just review everything all at once. So when you're looking at one policy, you're looking at absolutely everything. And the start of the year is a good time for me, but it's ultimately up to, your own personal situation and what works for you.
Well, I was going to ask you that, Andrew, because you were talking about reviewing your budget before. I guess I've got two questions. In terms of your budget, how often should we be reviewing it? And at what point in time do we do it? Is it once a year? Is it twice a year? Is it at policy anniversary date? Is it all in one go? You don't want to make this too difficult for yourself either. And it's not,
you want a
maybe
New
for
Year's
us,
resolution that'll stick. You don't want something
maybe for us it's enjoyable that we get to find that 1% and stuff and celebrate that sort of thing. But for our listeners, maybe they've got better things to do with their time. I'm not sure. But how frequently should we be looking at this stuff?
So the way that I manage, either from a client perspective or also myself personally, I'm re-looking at my budget at least once a year. So you're looking at it, and what I do is start of the year, just because it's an opportune time when you're reviewing all of your financial goals, and then tweaking it throughout the year as and when changes come in. So if you've had a change in income, tweak your budget and adjust that on your budget so that you know what the net position is, and so that you know if you need to make any adjustments anywhere. If you've had a change in expense or a new expense, add it in throughout the year. So you're reviewing it once annually, and then you're also adjusting it as and when changes happen throughout the year as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely. Nice, timely, relevant. And I guess from the annual perspective, and I'm the same, I do it at this time of year, and it just seems to tie in with the kind of theme around ticking over the new financial year, New Year's resolution, if you partake in that or what have you. But that seems to be the way that I do it as well too. So yeah, it sounds quite similar.
Yeah, awesome.
How does that then turn into or convert across to, your planning around your shorter term and then even your longer term goals to another extent as well too? But after you review your budget, your cash flow position, how do we then convert that across? And this is probably just something that we've covered off on before, but just backing over for our listeners to put some more context around, going through the budget and going through your cash flow position is one of those things, but it's a means to an end. So from a short-term and a long-term position, how does that tie into what it is that somebody wants to achieve from that perspective?
So one of the things that ultimately you really should be doing is your long-term goals should be set pretty far in advance. So we're talking goals, whether it's 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, whatever that time frame is. When you're reviewing all of your financial, essentially it's a financial health check at the start of the year, what you're also reviewing is your long-term goals. And that's the starting point for me. So let's say your long-term goal is to have an passive income of X in 15 years' time. Is that still relevant? Is that income and is that time frame still what I want to achieve? So your first point in call is to review the long-term goals. Make sure that that's still what you want. The time frame is still in the time frame that you want to achieve it in. And is it still relevant to your circumstances and what you want to achieve? And then scale that back. So then look back to, okay, well, in order to achieve my long-term goal or my long-term passive income or retirement or whatever that goal is, what are the things that I need to do in the next 12 months in order to help facilitate that goal? So first start with your long-term goals, make sure that's still relevant, make sure that there aren't any additional goals or additional things that you want to achieve.
Yep.
And then scale that back to, okay, what do I need to do in the next 12 months to help facilitate meeting that goal?
Yep. So you're starting with the longer term goals first. You want the big rocks in the jar first.
Exactly right.
Yep.
Exactly right. And then you're starting to plug those gaps, and essentially the shorter term goals, yes, they're goals, but a lot of the times what those goals are actually forming part of the strategy. They're actually the strategy that's helping you achieve the longer term goals.
I guess it's no different to it's simplistic in its thinking or its nature, but anything that you're doing longer term, you're thinking about that, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal, and then breaking it down into smaller steps around what it is that I need to do on a consistent basis in order to work towards that and achieve that, right? So you wake up, New Year's resolution, again, I want to be able to run a marathon, right? You're not going to be able to do that straight away, but the smaller term goal would be, okay, I need to start running for X amount of distance every day for the first couple of weeks. And then the next couple of weeks, you build up, your tolerance, your distance, your speed, your resilience,
exactly,
and so on and so forth.
Exactly right. So exactly the same thing as how you'd approach a marathon. You'd start at the end, start with what you want to achieve at the end, and then work out what are the smaller milestones that I need to achieve in the next 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, in order to achieve that big rock at the end.
Which is essentially the financial planning process that we go through, right? We sit in front of clients, identify what those goals are, help the clients shape those as well, because a lot of the time people just don't know what's possible, figure out what that looks like, and then we start to reverse engineer it based on time, income, assets, expenses, so on and so forth, to be able to work out what's possible and how we get there for clients.
Yeah, exactly. And the starting point needs to be around the budget, because you need to make sure that it's realistic. Like if you're planning to put away, $50,000 in savings over the next 12 months and you're only saving $1,000 a month, well, it's irrelevant. You're setting a goal that's impossible to achieve. So ultimately, the starting point is assessing your current position and assessing where you're at in order to be able to achieve what you want to achieve over the next 12 months.
And I think the key thing with that too is, and I touched on it a little bit before regarding the budget about sort of fantasy versus reality, but you need to be realistic around the goals and objectives that you want to achieve, because you don't want to put those there and put those in front of you in an unrealistic sense if you're never going to be able to do it. So if there is things, obstacles that are going to be in your way that are going to impact you from achieving those things, you need to be realistic about it and then plan accordingly for it. So for argument's sake, one of your goals is to, save up for a deposit for a property, and you're going to be taking some time off work for whatever reason, then you need to factor that in. There's no point in having an unrealistic goal, because you're just going to set yourself up for failure. And then when you don't achieve it, you're going to be disillusioned and the whole thing's probably going to fall apart.
Yeah. So it's a matter of you're determining what the obstacles that are going to be in your way are and building a strategy around those obstacles. And look, sometimes it's important, and this is going to sound really crazy, sort of coming to the end of the podcast and everything that we're talking about, but sometimes it's important to understand when you're not going to meet your goals and when you should basically abandon whatever that goal is. Like the amount of times that we've sat in front of a client and the strategy over the next 12 months is to purchase a property. And for whatever reason, the right property hasn't come up. There hasn't been the right thing that meets, or the right type of asset that meets the criteria of the client. And it can be really easy to say, okay, well, I'm just going to buy this that's in front of me so that I can tick that off the list. And it's not quite as simple as that, because obviously there's a bit more involved to the thought process behind just ticking the list, but making sure that, hey, if it's not working out for whatever reason, it doesn't mean that I need to just force my way through it. And it doesn't mean that I need to derail everything else just so that I can tick this off the list. Understand how what you're trying to do is going to achieve your goals, and determine that, yes, this is still the right strategy and this is still the right thing that I should be doing.
Andrew, well said. Justifying a case to sit in front of an advisor. I couldn't get that out. There you go. It's like you set that one up perfectly, but it wasn't scripted, I can assure you. But no, look, well said. And look, just in summary, I think coming back from the new year, reflecting on where you were, where you've come from, Christmas hangover, need to be mindful of that. Looking back at your budget and your cash flow position, so you've got a realistic understanding of your position and what's achievable within the next, say, 12 months, tying that into your short and your long-term financial goals, and then being realistic with all of that and setting yourself up essentially like that at the start of the year should set yourself up for a fruitful financial 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It still feels weird to say 2022, I'll tell you that.
It does. I've been signing the date and I've still been putting 2021 on there, so I need to switch that over in my brain. Absolutely. Look, Andrew, thank you. Good to be back. Feels good. Hopefully that first one came across for our listeners. And yeah, you can hear the excitement in our voice for us being back in the studio.
Feels like we were never gone.
That tends to happen too. But like always, with our listeners, if you've got any questions or if you wanted any further information on anything that we've spoken about, please feel free to reach out. There's details in the show notes if you need to get in contact with us. But once again, thank you for listening to our podcast. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, happy festive season, and we will catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks very much for listening, and Billy, thank you.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we've talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.